thanks so much, Jessica, for coming along. And just to say, Jessica Elizabeth is actually a coach. So, there's if anyone's got anything they need helping with, definitely go to Jessica. She knows how to deal with this, and she's had life experience, which is really helpful. So, and you've recommended a great book, a very controversial book, I have to say. Yeah, I was very excited. It's called The State of Affairs. And, it's not like a Gene Hackman movie or anything like that. It is actually regarding infidelity. So I'm going to do like a really brief introduction and then we'll go straight into it, so Esther Perel, who is the author, is also a psychotherapist, and she specializes in modern day love, partnership and dating. The 2017 book, there you are, completely ready.
Here it is.
Yeah, there it is. That is the book cover. The State of Affairs actually tackles the very tough subject of infidelity, and it offers a fresh look at the subject and asks the question, actually, is it a bad thing after all? And so, first of all, what were your key takeaways from this book?
Yeah, I think, and this might sound quite bizarre, but I think the most important thing about the book was that Esther actually wrote the book. I know so many people in my life, and not just in a professional, but also in a personal perspective, who they won't even talk about affairs, infidelity, open relationships, monogamy. They won't question things, and they don't want to explore different opinions. And I think, there's so much judgment around this area, but also so much pride. No one wants to admit or tell someone that they've been cheated on and talk through the nuances there. So I think, firstly, having written a book like this, Esther has opened the door for discussion and challenging perspectives. And that's the biggest thing that I got out of it, was an opportunity to talk. And I remember when I was reading the book, I just talked and talked and talked, and I was like, oh my gosh, here's something else to talk about. And so I suppose for people who haven't read the book, it covers numerous different types of affairs for different reasons, questions sort of the status quo of monogamy, maybe challenges is a better word, because it never necessarily questions, what's right or wrong. It just states facts. And I think it made me question, firstly, what even is an affair? What does that actually mean? And another, I think the hugest or biggest thing for me was about why people have affairs, because we often think, oh, it's just something like the bad people do. Bad people cheat. But actually, it's so much more nuanced than that. And that's what I found so fascinating.
Yeah, it's so complex, isn't it? And I guess, even the idea of relationships has changed a lot, doesn't it? I guess we've had a very heteronormative kind of idea of relationships for a very, very long time. And obviously that is changing a lot. And so I was just wondering, like, there was a really interesting fact that she said, which is apparently cheating is quite normal, and around about 25% in the US has actually cheated. And I think she was saying, and secrecy, sexual chemistry, or emotional involvement are sort of the key elements in infidelity. So I'm like, for you, what do you think constitutes as infidelity?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I know in the book she had sort of three elements of it, wasn't it? And if you don't have one, maybe it doesn't count. But I think the biggest thing for me is, does what's happened violate the sort of rules or commitments for your relationship that you set up, and sort of the expectations there? And I think what makes it so much more complicated than that is some people never have those conversations. Yeah. They never say, this is what I count as cheating, this is what I'd be hurt if what you did. So these boundaries are so blurred, which is why I think people chuck around, they cheated, so flippantly, because and other people are like, oh no, maybe not, because no one has those conversations, and the definition is so vague. And I think, also something that I think is really important when talking about cheating is the difference between a physical affair and an emotional affair.
Yeah,
affairs don't have to be about sex. And I think when I first thought about that, I was like, oh wow, yeah, that is true. And even within that, even that's so nuanced, the difference between Like someone drunkenly having lots of different, nights, and a long-term emotional affair where you have a relationship
Yeah.
with someone. So I
Mm.
think it's so complex, and there's not just one type of cheating, but I think it comes round to what you feel was sort of violated the rules of your relationship.
Yeah,
But in order to do that, you have to know what the rules of your relationship are,
that's it. Mm.
which can be problematic if you don't have those conversations.
I think that's right, isn't it? It's just such a lack of communication when it comes to relationships, isn't it? And exactly, if you don't have the guidelines, then how would you know, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
think, there was just a really interesting kind of idea that because of the uptick of sexual adventurousness of women, they say that sort of cheating has increased. And would you agree with that? Because obviously, after the 60s, things shifted in terms of sort of sexual freedom for women. So would you say there has been an increase as a result of that?
It's so interesting. I feel like we could have done a whole thing where we were talking about like sexual adventurousness in women and all of that. I feel like I could talk about that for a very long time. And I think it's really interesting, maybe just for a moment, to go into what we think of as like sexually, adventurous women, because what we've seen isn't women going crazy. It's that women have finally been allowed the same freedoms as men.
Exactly.
And, if we think about sort of those freedoms and kind of what's allowed women to get there, I think particularly in the 60s, birth control, the access to contraception has dramatically shifted things for women. But it's not necessarily meant that they've said, oh my gosh, I'm going to go crazy and have sex with 10 different men in one night. Maybe they do, that's up to them. But that's one part of it. And I think even just in, in this like technological age that we live in, the access to not just pornography, but
Yeah.
the information around sex is so widespread.
Yeah.
You can
Totally.
you can access any of this information. And if you read online, they're doing that, then inevitably people, not just men and women, men and women will think, well, why aren't I doing that? Why don't I have more sex? Um, and I think particularly if we look in the past, that sex used to be sort of a simple act between man and wife, but then men could go off and have affairs, or, that really awful stereotype about men having an affair with their secretary and all
Yeah.
of that kind of thing. And it
Yeah.
was always, when you look through that, it's the sexually adventurous women who were sort of the ones who were doing something bad.
Yeah.
And now those adventurous women are everyone. And it's all of us most of the time. And I think women now know a lot more about sex. Sex is a lot more accessible. So we want to explore and make up for centuries of lost time. And I don't necessarily think it's about adventure. It's about women simply having the same right to sex as men do.
Yeah.
And maybe just within that, we're having more open conversations and we're able to talk about things. So maybe it seems like infidelity is so high, but actually maybe it's just because we're talking about it more and we're able to, because it was such a taboo subject for such a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so weird because actually, funny enough, I was watching, American Pie today, and they were supposed to be like 17-year-olds, and we were just like, hang on a second, like they seem really sort of emotionally immature for 17-year-olds even at that time. And so I was asking my partner, like, were you like that at that age? And he was just like, no, we were just much younger. And I'm just wondering whether, it's not just women, it's also men. Things have
Yeah.
shifted quite considerably in terms of availability of exactly pornography and things like that. So I do wonder whether there has just been a general shift towards just more sort of access to sex essentially over the decades. So I didn't think it was particularly women that was having this big kind of sort of change, but I thought it was kind of both in a way. And so it was quite interesting. And there was I think and there was a really interesting thing about the idea of jealousy, because obviously I've been in situations where I've been jealous as well, and I've always sort of really beat myself up for being jealous, and I was just wondering, do you think that jealousy is necessary? A bit of jealousy is necessary for love, which is kind of what Perel was saying.
Yeah. And I think there's two things that maybe come to mind. One is very much from my own sort of professional perspective, is it really depends on the type of love. You know, what do we mean by love and a caring relationship? In a very toxic love and toxic relationship, you need an awful lot of jealousy to be able to keep that insane high and that insane low. And that's almost what it breeds off. And let's not lie, whether we choose to admit it or not, toxic relationships are everywhere. Toxic love is everywhere. And so many people live in those relationships, and maybe they're not even aware, but they feel this heightened sense of jealousy probably 80% of the time. And do I think that's healthy? Probably not, because your partner's meant to make you feel secure and safe, and you should feel secure in your relationship. So I don't think it should be one of the strongest emotions present, but also at the same time, in a healthy relationship or in any healthy attraction, do we want others to find our partner attractive? Absolutely. Do we want to still be found attractive by other people? Absolutely, because it shows that we are attractive people who, you know, are desired, which as humans is probably one of our base instincts, is I want to socialize and I want to have these conversations and I want to be intimate with people. So I think that's very natural. And it'd be interesting to see what you think. So say you mentioned you have a partner, but people who say things like, oh, I've only got eyes for my partner, I think are really kidding themselves, because biologically we're wired to find all these different sensory things out there attractive, and we can't just switch that off. So I think it's necessary and it's a healthy emotion, but when it becomes the strongest emotion in your relationship, that's probably when it becomes sort of unhealthy in a way, I think.
Yeah, that's so true. Actually, you're right, because it can become the dominant kind of factor in a relationship, isn't it? For it to kind of continue to go on, but obviously that's just not like viable for a long-term relationship at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the moment it becomes your sort of, you know, you can't go out for a drink with a group of friends without being like, oh, something feels wrong, I feel a bit jealous, then I think you need to sit down and talk about what that is in your relationship, because it's important and it should have a little something which, you know, sparks and, you know, it creates sexual tension and it can create good conversations and things like that. But the moment that it becomes what leads you, I think it can be very, very toxic and very unhealthy.
Yeah, for sure. It can go sort of borderline abusive, I think, you know, if it becomes very possessive as well. For sure. So definitely, yeah. And actually, yeah, because it's a very controversial book, because obviously, you know, people don't usually say, oh yeah, infidelity has its upsides, but you know, yeah, she was saying something about trust. You know, so is it better to be honest about an affair or hide it to allay your guilt? Because like she used an example, I think, of like someone who was dying, and you know, is it better to just tell them, or the other way around, should they tell you if it's
Yeah.
not going to serve a purpose of any kind?
Yeah. And I think sort of carrying on maybe from the point that she makes in the book is that because there are lots of different types of affairs. So for example, she talks about an exit affair, which is either because of the affair or just otherwise, you know that you want that relationship to end. And you know, I'm not happy with this person. I could either be happier on my own or happier with someone else. I want this affair to lead to an exit of the relationship. I think that's when probably discussing and talking about the affair is, you know, yeah, I want out, so I'm telling you about this kind of thing.
Right.
Or there are also types of affairs which are very much like, I just need this for me. And actually, is it healthy? Healthy is maybe the wrong word. Is it better or less hurtful to keep it to myself? Because I want to stay in that relationship. So what can come out of telling someone? that you have hurt them, what's the point of it?
Yeah,
And
tricky.
actually, yeah, and it's funny because the more that I read the book, the more I was like, yeah, I think if someone wanted to stay in a relationship with me, I wouldn't want to know. And
Yeah.
I think there are a few times where I've been told that I've been cheated on, and it was more hurtful and more confusing to hear them say that they still wanted to be with me, but they'd done this, and like, oh, I don't mean it, it didn't mean anything. Well, why tell me?
Yeah.
And I think the point that she makes is quite a lot to do with you're alleviating your own guilt and you're putting your own guilt on the person just to kind of help yourself. And actually, affairs are often very what was the word I was going to say? I've completely lost the word. They're very selfish. Affairs are often very selfish. So why continue on being selfish by telling them just to hurt them?
Yeah, maybe ignorance is bliss sometimes. Who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting. You never know because some people think that truth is more important. That's the most important thing in a relationship. Yeah, it's so tricky, isn't it?
It is. I think it just depends on the person, really, because, if you're a person exactly that would rather have the truth, even if it hurts them, then that's the type of person you are. But I think that's very individual to everyone. So, like I would prefer the truth, but that's just me. So yeah,
Yeah,
but that's just me. So I'm not sure whether that would work for everyone. And I guess
yeah.
those kind of conversations have to be had before it gets to that point, so you know where you stand.
Yeah, and I think it almost comes back to what we were saying at the beginning about what is cheating. Well, actually, when you have those conversations about what classes as cheating for you, probably within that, it's also important to say, not say, if I did cheat on you, would you like to know? But just exploring that,
Yeah.
I think is so important.
Definitely, definitely. I think you can have those conversations. If it is a healthy relationship, I think you can actually have those conversations and say, if it ever happened, if it ever came to this, what would you like in this scenario, sort of thing. Even if obviously it's a worst case scenario, but
Mm,
it's better to know than not know.
yeah, yeah. It's funny, I don't know, and again, this is so personal, but if they didn't want to salvage relate with the relationship and we were gonna break up anyway, just spare me the hurt because there's a difference between being broken up with and you can question things and it's really hard, but actually being cheated on brings in so many different dynamics in terms of yes, you feel betrayed, but then it really digs into your self-worth of what did
Definitely.
I do wrong? Is there something wrong with me? And I think if you can spare someone that, the better.
And I think that's where that conversation has to be had. Like if it happened, don't tell me, sort of thing. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be had, rather than the one that whether it's like full blown trust or none at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, personal to everyone, isn't it? Yeah, and then obviously, it is. It's kind of interesting because is infidelity a sign of an unhappy relationship?
Mm. It's so funny because we obviously want to jump and say, yes, you're unhappy, therefore you're having an affair. But the point that Esther makes in very different ways, and she obviously has so much wealth of experience with her different clients, is almost that it can save a lot of relationships. And I think the kind of question that comes to mind for me is, what are you getting out of the affair versus what are you missing or getting out of your relationship that you're in? And have you discussed these issues and explored them? So for example, I don't know if it's in the book or if it's in one of her podcasts, she talks about a couple who he wants to sort of explore quite a lot of different things sexually, and she says actually, no, I'm not interested in that. And then she later discovers that he's had an affair and he's done all of these different sexual things. And, you know, his point wasn't, I'm really, really unhappy with you. It's that I said I wanted to do these things. You weren't able to do that, and that's okay, but it just means I've gone somewhere else. Now, the thing that I would say is, sure, he wasn't unhappy. He loved his partner, but he didn't communicate that it was so important to him. And so I think that's probably what is the issue, is he wasn't willing or open to having that conversation and saying, this is actually what's so important to me. And I think you mentioned, you know, she used another example of, I can't remember if it was the wife or something who was dying. And actually, you know, you can still love someone so, so deeply and be going through something so hard with them and just say, I just need someone with me right now. And I think it's a lot more nuanced than, I'm just being a bad person, I want to go and have sex with someone. You know, I think it's so hard. It's so hard. And always, as sort of the outlier looking in, you always think there's something deeply wrong with that relationship. But actually, I think it just, you know, then the whole book to me really was about just learning just to judge people less. We have no idea what's going on in any of these relationships. They might be actually, you know, truly be two of the most happy people in the world, but one of them is having an affair. It doesn't invalidate the relationship that they have.
Definitely. I guess, you know, in that way, monogamy is changing as well, quite considerably, isn't it? I guess it was based on a different time, isn't it? When obviously you needed that level of security. But I guess when you have much more disposable income, you've got more rights and things start to change. And so there is, I guess, a social aspect of, you know, the shift in having sort of these two-party relationships, essentially. And I know that you've asked that question before about like polyamorous kind of, you know, relationships and stuff. And obviously that's, you know, there's more and more kind of sort of platform for that now. So it's quite interesting to see how it's all changed. And now the question is, can someone actually stop being unfaithful?
I think there's two things there. Because when we say unfaithful, what comes to mind is there's a difference between ending an affair that you've been having and stopping unfaithfulness as a whole. And in response to the second question of, can someone stop being an unfaithful individual, say they've had a string of affairs, I think the very simple question is, do they want to stop being unfaithful? Because I think there are so many people who are so deeply unhappy in their relationships, and yet they choose not to have an affair. And I think that's what people sort of forget, is that it is a choice. Even, you know, there's so many things out there which are like, well, men are just predisposed to need more sex, and, you know, it's the male needs. And it's like, well, no, it's still a choice. And I think that's really important, is, can someone stop being unfaithful? Sure, if they choose to. And I think, you know, part of the reason I'm a coach is that it's so much about self-responsibility and kind of empowering yourself to make healthy decisions. And if you choose to have an affair, you are choosing to. You didn't, accidentally fall into bed with someone, you know. It is a very active choice, and it's up to you to create boundaries, implement boundaries, and also respect other people's boundaries as well. And I think another sort of question in and amongst that is, what was the reason for having an affair? And if someone is sort of craving something so deeply and they feel that it's not being met in their relationship, then of course they'll probably keep being unfaithful. And I think the point to make there is, people can fix their relationships. Infidelity isn't a sign that your relationship is doomed and it's not gonna work. And I think a lot of Esther's work within that is, you know, people come to her and they say someone's had an affair or something like that, but you can talk things through, you can explore different avenues for yourself. And that's what I think is so important, is communication. And it's so cheesy, it's always about communication is key, but can someone stop being unfaithful? Sure, if they choose to stop being unfaithful and they talk about and are willing to try and sort the issues that they have.
Yeah. And actually, you touched upon it, which is, would you consider it the worst kind of betrayal in a relationship?
Oh, I think it's such a tough question. For me personally, yes, I think it's the worst because, and it just a personal perspective, is you're putting your emotional and physical safety in someone else, and
Hmm.
they're choosing to betray that. Um, and I think, whether betrayal is financial or neglect or infidelity, I think they're equally as hard for very different people. And I'm not saying people should go and write down, what's the worst betrayal that they could experience in a relationship, but actually some people can forgive
Yeah.
unfaithfulness. Some people can forgive, financial betrayal. Some
Hmm.
people can't. And it's important that you sort of know and understand your own sort of boundaries, so to speak.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. Exactly. It is personal to everyone. And do you think, yes, are people kind of wired for non-monogamous relationships, or is it, do you think it's just, we've been kind of, as a society, been trained to be
Mm.
that way?
I think if we look at sort of human biology and human, evolution throughout time, and even today in some sort of tribal cultures, and which are simply some of the purest forms of cohabitation that we have in community, um, they care so much about community, but not necessarily community as in me and you together. It is simply us together. There is no
Mm.
mention of you and me and others. It's all about togetherness. And so I suppose the specifics of who parents are and all of that kind of thing doesn't necessarily matter as much because it was just about all of us being as one. And before we sort of evolved into settlers, the hunter gatherer within us, it was just food was our main priority, survival was the priority. So the social stuff surrounding it was just far more simple, of like,
Mm.
doesn't really matter kind of thing. And then it's really interesting that, when we became settlers 10,000 years ago, roughly, which people are like, that's such a long time ago, but actually, in the whole grand scheme of things, it's not. Um, I think, pride entered in of this is mine, this
Mm.
is yours. And so, we had things like, well, this is my town, this is my food that I've grown. And so at some point it's led to, well, this is my partner too, or
Mm.
this is it. And I think obviously as we've evolved through time, that's probably become far more prominent. And I think in terms of non-monogamous relationships, there are obviously so many nuances there. Do you mean non-monogamous in terms of emotional relationship, or do you mean in terms of physical relationship? And I think it's something that I've read in quite a few different books, is it says that as humans we are socially monogamous. We want our place of safety and we really crave that, but we're not necessarily sexually monogamous because the drive
Mm.
to have sex with lots of different people doesn't necessarily go away.
Mm.
And I think a kind of secondary question to this is, there's a really big difference between someone who is genuinely polyamorous and willing and wanting to have relationships with lots of different people, or being in an open
Yeah.
relationship, versus someone who just wants to have lots of sex.
Yeah. So true. That's so
And
true.
I think so often when we talk about non-monogamous relationships, we're talking about people who just want to have sex with other people. We're
Yeah.
not talking about people who truly want to connect and have deeper relationships with others. And I think that's where it gets such a bad name
Yeah.
because,
You're right.
oh, we're in an open relationship. And people are like, oh, you mean you just want to have sex with other people? And maybe they do. But for some people, they take it very seriously and they're like, no, I want to really date and connect deeply with others. Um, so it's an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And again, we're seeing more and more, which is interesting to how it's shifting, and it's completely acceptable. These
Yeah.
communities exist. So I'm like, on that happy note, what what do you think this book would get out of 5 stars? Because obviously, still controversial, but yes.
It's funny, I almost am like, can I give it more than five? Only
Ah,
because I mean, in terms of like Esther's writing style, all of that, amazing. It's grounded in an awful lot of evidence, both from her experience as a psychotherapist, but also just from general, scientific evidence out there, which I think is great. But I think the reason where it differs from so many other great books I've read is it challenges you. And I think,
Definitely.
particularly when it comes to sort of self-help, non-fiction books, if it doesn't challenge you, change your perspective, help you to grow and evolve, what's the point in reading it? And I've read so many books which I think are so wonderful and I really loved them, but they just said everything that I already thought.
Yeah.
And actually, this book, I didn't necessarily agree with a lot of it. I didn't understand a lot of it to start off with, but actually it challenged me, it grew my perspective. And that, I think, I give it 5 out of 5. Love it.
That's fab. Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. You're right. Sometimes we like to be in an echo chamber and just hear what we want to hear. So yeah, I think you're right. In a way, it's good that it makes you feel uncomfortable because that's the whole point of a good book.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not necessarily, with lots of things, I didn't necessarily change my mind on it. Like, I still think that, monogamy is the best thing for me. But actually now it just makes me a more just nuanced and just a kinder and less judgmental individual to other people, because I understand why someone might want to have an affair or have an open relationship. And I think that's it. It's just the key to understanding and trying to be a better human being to others out there who disagree with us.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's amazing. Great suggestion. And, again, you feel free to come back whenever with more suggestions.
Controversial books.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's great. It's good to like try something different. Exactly. And, actually be like, actually, this is also a self-help book, but, just a different kind. So actually, these kind of books are quite good recommendations because it might actually challenge someone else out there. So
exactly.
Definitely.
Can I ask? I don't know if you read the full book, but what did you sort of take from it, do you think?
I was kind of the same. It made me uncomfortable for sure because it did challenge me on some of my own ideas. Because especially like growing up with quite sort of limited views on sort of what a relationship is supposed to be, and so it did make me feel very uncomfortable in terms of things like jealousy and stuff like that. So I was just like, okay, that's interesting because it was always told to me, it's not good to be jealous. It's not good to be this, that, the other. And I think that's also the problem, is that as a society, we've been told very narrow definitions of how we're supposed to be. And I think that's what it really helped in terms of being like, actually, it's okay. It's not that bad. You don't beat yourself up. So yeah, that was really, actually found that really interesting. So yes, controversial, didn't agree with everything, didn't really, again, but it didn't mean that, it was an interesting book because I thought it was great. Yeah,
exactly. And I think she's written other books which I haven't actually read, but her podcast, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. How do we begin, or something like that, is a series of recorded therapy sessions. So for anyone who likes controversial stuff, that is a place to go because they are amazing and very fascinating. And you're like the fly on the wall, which I think, we obviously all love.
Yeah, for sure. And also, God, I don't know how she managed to do that without like getting into trouble. But obviously, she must have got the
she got their permission.
Consent of all those people. So, yeah, God. Oh, that's interesting. I need to actually listen to that for sure. Yeah, gosh. Wow, awesome. Yeah, with that in mind, yes, we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. And again, excellent choice. Yes, so there will be a rerun of this, obviously, on the Instagram page, and I'll send you your own copy of this anyway. So, and so hopefully see you soon and speak to you soon.
Yeah. All right. Have a lovely evening.
You too, dear. Bye.
Bye.